Hello, everybody, and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Don Arleth. Donald Trump has been in office for almost 2 weeks now. One of his key campaign promises was to end the war in Ukraine in his first 24 hours of the presidency. Having already broke that promise, the new American president wants to stop the killing and strike a deal with Vladimir Putin. Comments by the president and some in his administration are still leaving us guessing what the strategy to end the war will look like. And now joining me to discuss where American policy is headed concerning the war in Ukraine is political scientist from Arizona State University, Ljubomir Filipović. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us tonight on World Talks.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yes. Now, I'd like to start with Marco Rubio's latest statement, something that President Zelenskyy fired back on earlier this evening, or earlier today, rather. A statement about Ukraine in his first interview. And actually, I think we have a soundbite. Let's see if we can play that.
First of all, I would like Marco Rubio to come to Ukraine. It seems to me that for him it is very necessary to look at what Russia has done, because he has made statements that the war set Ukraine back 100 years. I think that this statement raises questions, to be frank, and that's why Mr. Rubio needs to come to Ukraine, first of all to see what Russia has done, but also to see what the Ukrainian people did, what they were able to do for the security of Ukraine and the world, and talk to Ukrainians.
Now, the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, seems to not quite have all the information when it comes to Ukraine. What are your thoughts on those comments that he made? And should he go to Ukraine and see for himself exactly what the situation looks like to better understand the conflict?
I wouldn't say that Secretary Rubio's statement is uninformed. I would rather say that this is a shift, a natural shift, from someone who was in Congress, who was a lawmaker, and who was one of the most vocal U.S. lawmakers when it comes to Ukrainian support. But now, when he's heading U.S. diplomacy, naturally, his tone and his statements are shifting into more pragmatic tone. So what are the possible consequences of statements like this is that Ukrainian public will start to doubt U.S. support for their U.S. Belief that Ukrainian military victory is possible. And that could undermine morale of the Ukrainian defense, and together with other decisions from the U.S. administration and statements by the U.S. administration, it could have a long-term consequences, critical consequences for the Ukrainian defense.
Yes. Now, when we look at the rhetoric of General Kellogg, the envoy for Ukraine and Russia that has been appointed by Donald Trump, if we look at his statements over the last, say, 2 years, he has been rather quite pro-Ukrainian, and he's able to have identified exactly what this war truly means. But now, working for the Trump administration, Kellogg has said that, well, he still hasn't made his trip to Kyiv, and he says that both sides are going to have to make very difficult concessions. Why do you think the delay in his trip to the Ukrainian capital, and even to Moscow for that matter, if he is indeed the person that is supposed to lead the charge in getting these negotiations started?
I think that for the first week of the Trump administration, they've been too much focusing on the internal issues, such as immigration, dealing with the administration itself taking over the leverages of power within the administration, and of course it affects the international affairs and foreign relations of the U.S. So I think that they're mostly focusing on internal domestic public in the U.S. Special Envoy Kellogg's statement, if you pair it with yesterday's statement about the need for elections in Ukraine, is dangerously reiterating Russian propaganda that questions the legitimacy of the President Zelenskyy's administration. So it's another proof that may tell the Ukrainian public that something is going on when it comes to Washington's relation to Ukraine. What Ukrainian public is facing now is uncertainty, because as you perfectly stated, President Trump's administration hasn't gone beyond these general broad statements that conflict and suffering needs to end. But if you ask an average Ukrainian or Ukrainian leader, what does it mean? There are no answers. And I think that this uncertainty, paired with what you said, not at least not direct public communication between two sides, is something that is leaving Ukraine to hinge in a situation when Russia is gaining ground in eastern Ukraine on the front lines and internationally.
Right. Also, something that's concerning is Donald Trump saying that he wants to meet with Vladimir Putin, presumably to have a one-on-one meeting, which actually talks about Ukraine without Ukraine. President Zelenskyy has said for years now that you can't talk about Ukraine without Ukraine. Is this going to be a problem with the Trump administration trying to make a deal
This definitely undermines
without Zelensky's input?
Yeah, yes. This definitely undermines Ukrainian authority, and the statements regarding the Greenland and Panama and other statements by the U.S. administration is like they're hinting towards Russia that their worldview and thinking that they could make great bargains, Yalta-style great bargains on global level, would put Ukraine in a place that just only is a part of the grand bargain that would include maybe Russia's position in Africa, where they're gaining successes, the changed situation in Syria, Central Asia, and other places. And this removing focus directly from the conflict in Ukraine and together with excluding Ukraine from conversation and from is dangerous and puts Ukraine in a much more difficult situation.
And you mentioned this rhetoric with Panama Canal, with Greenland, even with Canada becoming potentially the 51st state. How does this rhetoric play into the Kremlin's playbook, if you will, and will they take advantage of this?
Perfectly, of course. This is with limited successes on the ground, on front lines, is a lot of effort and in their propaganda efforts, as they have been doing in the past 10 years. And this is something that resonates with some of the far-right and conservative circles in the West. And by doing this, Russia, and it paired with statements, dangerous statements coming from people in President Trump's administration, like Elon Musk, this is something that makes U.S. allies anxious and makes Ukrainian defense more complicated and difficult.
Now, also, a freeze on U.S. aid not only affects Ukraine, but it affects, it affects NGOs and civil society movements around the world. And I'd like to use this question to kind of breach off somewhat and discuss the situation that we're seeing down in Serbia, perhaps over in Georgia. First of all, though, how is this freeze on U.S. aid to Ukraine going to affect the war effort, and what short-term effects will it have there in the country?
So, this is just another example of how President Trump's decisions in the beginning of his mandate, the early beginning of his mandate, are leaving allies, especially allies, in this uncertain position. I'm repeating myself, but it's true. So when it comes to aid in Ukraine, development aid in Ukraine, it was very critical in the past 3 years since the beginning of full scale of Ukraine when it comes to humanitarian efforts. And while President Trump claims that his moves are directed at political and what they call political and cultural activities, freezing all support except military support, we need to be honest here, is making Ukrainian humanitarian efforts much more dangerous. We are witnessing every day that cities like Zaporozhye and cities on the front line, and even further deeper into Ukrainian territories, are having these humanitarian challenges. They're suffering huge losses, and United States support, developmental support, was critical in this effort. And while we may understand that the America First logic, in the sense that then the U.S. decision makers are first and foremost responsible, and they're responding to the American citizens. This moves like this are undermining stability all around the world, and eventually this could hurt American national interests, because unstable partners, unstable allies will eventually become a burden for Americans, American foreign policy, for Americans' budget, and it could lead, paradoxically, the U.S. economy into recession.
Okay, well, it's only been 2 weeks. We still have plenty of time to go as Donald Trump is president of the United States, so we'll have to see exactly how this all shapes up. I'd like to thank you very much for joining me, a political scientist from Arizona State University, Ljubomir Filipović. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.